so we are talking about Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and in a twist, we're not talking about predestination, much to my chagrin, but instead we're talking about the soul, which is interesting, but I don't get to fight about predestination again. So,
the soul is so good in this one. So, thank you.
So we have some text up here. Here, you want to just talk and I can help them?
No, it's fine. You talk.
All right. From the Second Helvetic Confessions, we affirm that human consists of two different substances in one person: an immortal soul, which, when separated from the body, neither sleeps nor dies; an immortal body, which will nevertheless be raised up from the dead at last judgment, in order that then the whole human, either in life or death, abide forever. Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And from the Gospel of Slughorn, Professor Slughorn says, you must understand that the soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. So we have those two soul questions, which if anybody wants to talk about, we can. But the way we started the last couple, I do want to give just an open general, like, what's everybody think about this book? Where does this book rank? What do you think about when you think about the Half-Blood Prince?
Another good one.
This was my favorite one. Yeah, this was my favorite one in the series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think this one, and I don't think that until I read it, and then I'm like, oh, this is my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I forget that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle?
I think this is a good one, but I think I'm like Anna, that I just, whatever book I'm reading is my favorite one of mine.
That's fair.
But last week's that one is just so action packed. I love it. So
why is it your favorite, Jeremy?
I just like the deep dive into the history. You learn about Tom Riddle's parents. It's just the whole mystery of who is R.A.B. After I finished reading the book, I was kind of a conspiracy theorist, and I didn't believe that Dumbledore was dead for a few months. Amy and I would argue about that. But I just kind of like that whole, especially after, and again, I'm in the middle of the Order of the Phoenix, where you had Dumbledore ignoring Harry the whole time, and Harry just being furious about that. Now all of a sudden, they're Batman and Robin and hanging out together and doing all these things, and that was just kind of fun to see that relationship develop in that way.
Mm-hmm. Laura, any thoughts about this one?
Nope.
All right, let's dive in. So, see how Lane's computer works. All right. So a math equation. What is human? And we see three different parts here. But as we dive into different soul thoughts, how do you as a person just think about yourself? Are you soul, body, and spirit? Are you soul and body? Or and what is kind of the combination of math parts that you take up of yourself, if that makes sense?
So what's the difference between the soul and the spirit?
I saw that and I almost edited it, because I was like, that might be too far, but I left it, I just found this image and I was like, that's an interesting, I don't know if anybody else has a swing at it.
I don't know, because I think of it as the soul and spirit are one.
Sorry, hold on. Oliver's yelling again. How do I get it big again? All right. Sorry. I'm going to mute.
You're playing something.
Okay, go ahead.
Doesn't C.S. Lewis write somewhere that, and I don't know if there's really a distinction here or what the distinction is, because it's been a long time since I read it, but, C.S. Lewis, doesn't he contend, I think maybe in Mere Christianity, that we don't have souls, we are souls, and that we maybe have bodies instead?
Yep,
And that's kind of how I look at it.
that's the quote. That's interesting.
Yeah. I can't remember the theology behind that or his thinking behind that, but
Michelle, any thoughts?
I said that the soul and the spirit to me are the same thing.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I tend towards with I think all of my pain that I'm in all the time, with just the weather and because I'm always kind of fighting with my body and the joints in it, I tend to see my soul and my body differently, because even if my soul hurts, even if my body hurts, my soul doesn't. So I think I'm kind of a dualist in that way. So something to think about. Lane, do you have any thoughts about that as you fight with Oliver? All right, so we're gonna just take a deep dive into the Shema, which is something that our Jewish brothers and sisters repeat every morning and every night. It's their prayer. When I was in college, I worked for a Jewish family, and when I would tuck the children into bed, they would say, "But what about the Shema?" And so when I was in college, I really knew this in Hebrew, but unfortunately, I do not anymore. But I did kind of want to point out that the arrows on the bottom shows you which way you're reading, because I kind of I went down a bunny trail myself into my ancient Hebrew that I can't remember anymore, but I was trying to read it, and I was like, that doesn't make sense of the words. And then of course I remembered that Hebrew is backwards, so that made a lot more sense. So this is the Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4-9. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. These words I command you today shall be in your heart. And then it teaches you how exactly to remember those things. And Laura, you are probably super comfortable with these words, putting them into images for our stewardship campaign. Of course, not from Deuteronomy, probably. So the question is, how do we differentiate, and how do we separate these three things? The heart, the soul, and our might. And why does the Shema, and why does this ancient prayer that our Jewish brothers and sisters say twice a day, why do they separate those things in particular, do we think? Because I don't have an answer.
So I can separate out might from heart and soul, I think. That being kind of bodily efforts and work and all those kinds of things. I have a hard time in my mind right now separating heart and soul from one another.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I was thinking that heart would be with your feelings, and your might would be all of your determination. But then that leaves a question mark for soul. So I'm not sure.
I think I have a bigger difference in my mind between heart and soul. To me, soul is maybe, I don't think it's fixed, but it's like, I feel like soul is everlasting, and heart is sometimes temporal.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sort of saying out loud what's just appearing in my mind, but like your heart seems to me sometimes to be fickle in terms of what engages it and brings it out, and whereas your soul is like your inner, it's your stable inner being.
Yeah. That's really interesting. through, if you go to the Bible Project Online, and I know that we talk about this all the time, but they actually just did a Shema series where they pulled out heart, soul, mind.
Cool.
And they might have strength, because I think they were focusing on the Shema in the New Testament, which you see here. But and they have a really good video that I almost wanted to bring in, but that would lead us down like a totally different bunny hole, which we have more than an hour and a half. But they said that soul, the word for soul in Hebrew is nephesh, and it actually means your throat.
Neck, yeah.
Yeah, your neck. And so, or it can mean like your living body, which is so interesting. So, like in Genesis, God created the nephesh that swam, and the nephesh with wings. And so it's just a really interesting component that I never thought about. And then of course we have all different types of soul. We have different images of soul where we have, and then that was the other bunny trail going down, soul versus breath in the Bible, which is really interesting because humans are not alive until they have the breath of God. But is the breath of God also our souls? So, but I kind of steered us away from that. Just something for us to think about. So yeah, and that's where we get in Ezekiel, the army rising, breathe the breath of God into the army and the standing bones. But then our FEC daily today was Psalm 103. Oh my soul. So there's different connotations of it, in the same way that breath and spirit and wind represents the Holy Spirit throughout the Bible. So we see the Shema, the beginning of the Shema, as on our left side corner, but then on our right we have Mark 12, 29 through 30. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. So, the question is, what is the same? What is different? Why do you think so? What dimensions to humanity are added by Jesus' addition? And then what is the soul theology of these? You can take a whack at it, anybody with any question.
Well, the New Testament brings in mind.
Are we frozen?
You are not frozen. We're thinking.
Okay, that's fine. I was like, everybody is like really just solid right now. Laura, what did you say? Did you cut off or?
I just said that the New Testament verse brings in the mind.
Yeah.
Might strength.
Mind and strength. Yeah.
So, the thinking part of humans.
And I find it interesting that in Deuteronomy, it's the Lord is our God. And then over here in Mark, it's the Lord our God.
Yeah. Yep. Because I don't know the Greek off the top of my head, but the Yahweh is our Adonai. So, of course, they're different connotations. God. So, yeah. So what are the different elements that maybe soul, mind, and strength. Why do you think maybe Jesus added those? And then also, how does it change the connotation of how we should love God?
I would say with the addition of with all your mind, it's for us to be more intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, part of me thinks, is it right after or part of or right after the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes, doesn't Jesus also then go on to talk about, well, so you're not sleeping with other people, but you're thinking about other people and that you're committing adultery. Yeah, you're not killing people, but are you, denigrating people so much that you're, killing them in a sense in your mind?
Right.
Kind of thing too.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
So it's not, yeah.
Keep going.
No, I don't have anything. Thanks.
No, and of course, depending on what gospel you read, you get this in different places. I think traditionally it's always when that person comes and tests Jesus and says, "What is the best commandment?" And this is Jesus's response. And the second, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So for me, it brings out the New Testament brings out such a holistic idea to me that maybe the Shema brings out like a psychological or internal part, but the first commandment on the right and Mark really draws out that I can love God with my body as well, which how you do that, who knows, but
well, and I don't have an answer, but I wonder do these reflect different, the Shema is obviously to the ancient Israelites. The Mark's passage is to, the Hebrews of the time or and Gentiles of the time. So does that reflect different aspects or different places where God is in his relationship with people? It's more of a question. I don't have an answer to that. So I'm just trying to think, what's the difference between the two contexts there?
Yeah, I wonder a lot of how how proximity to Roman occupation changes the theology at the time.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I couldn't tell you Roman theology off the top of my head, ancient Roman theology, but I wonder if that has more of that dualistic idea of body and soul. Because I know that's kind of theology and Greek kind of thinking. So I wonder if it's that. And then I wonder why Jesus took something that historically is repeated twice a day by each person and then just slightly changed. Do you think that was like a teaching device, or was it to supersede the old, to root out the old and to replace it? Or
well, Jesus changes our relationship completely, so it would make sense.
And if I think, did I hear you say that kind of that dualistic view of the world, or that viewpoint is a Greek viewpoint? And so as Jesus changing this, he knows that, the Jewish folks have the Shema. Do I need to now create something that's more accessible to Greeks and Gentiles? Again, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and then of course, and then theologians will take this and say, of course Jesus said that is the thing, like that what Jesus calls the first commandment is actually commandments what we would call 1 through 3 of Exodus 20 of the 10 commandments. So it's just an interesting concept that I think I just wanted to pull out. And of course, we could spend all night talking about different soul images in the Bible. So taking and kind of isolating these two. So this is not a fair question, but what would you say is the soul theology of these two texts? Or what can you tell, what is the Bible trying to explain to us about the soul from these two texts?
Is it that your soul is your
Here,
being? Sorry, Jeremy.
no, go ahead. Yours is better. Did you say, Michelle, that your soul is, it kind of demonstrates your soul as your being?
Yeah.
And, yeah. Yeah. Oops.
Kind of like maybe who you are.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's just an interesting, so like your
Yeah.
identity or your essence.
Yeah, that's a good word
Yeah.
for it.
I missed that word.
Essence.
Yeah, I was thinking that the theology that comes to mind for me about the soul is that, God wants all of us. And so maybe the one word that would encompass all of us in that text would be soul.
Yeah.
Instead of specific parts like heart and mind and strength.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Like your holistic whole. Maybe. All right, so then we turn to another, I think, piece of theology. Our Book of Confessions. We're getting a little Presbyterian now. So our Book of Confessions, I think our current one looks like this. This is the one I looked up. So, and then we're going to look at these 3 quotes, and then from these different confessions, we're going to kind of pull out. We can talk about them, but what the end all question is, what would you say that Presbyterians believe about souls? So from the Heidelberg Catechism, how is the resurrection of the body comfort you? Not only will my soul be taken immediately after this life to Christ its head, but also my very flesh will be raised by the power of Christ, reunited with my soul and made like Christ's glorious body. I'll just run through these so you can process through them. And then you guys are in my way. Can I have my Book of Confession really quickly? Or on my other computer? Hold on. Hold on. Ready? So now concerning man, Scripture says. Scripture says that in the beginning he was made good according to the image and likeness of God, that God placed him in paradise and made all things subject to him. That is what Davis magnificently sets forth in Psalm 8. Moreover, God gave him a wife and blessed them. We also affirm that man consists of 2 different substances in one person, an immortal soul, which when separated from body neither sleeps nor dies, and a mortal body, which nevertheless be raised from the dead on the last judgment, in order that the whole man, either in life or death, abide forever. So that's the one that we saw on Facebook. And then the larger catechism is the question is, how did God create man? And the answer, of course, is after God made all the other creatures, he created man and female, formed from the body of man, from the dust of the ground, and the woman the rib of the man. endued with them living, reasonable, and immortal souls, made them after his own image in knowledge, righteousness, and holiness, having the law of God written in their hearts, and the power to fulfill it with dominion over the creatures, yet subject to fall. Dun, dun, dun. So, how do we feel, Presbyterians, about souls? I mean, in reference to the Book of Confessions.
My first thought about the Heidelberg Catechism is, I don't want my body. At least not this one. Maybe if it gives me my 20-year-old body, I'd think about it.
I think that's the question I hear every so often. It's like, I know we're going to be resurrected in the body, but like, what age?
Yeah.
And I just don't know. Like,
Or does my back feel better when it's resurrected? I hope so.
or if it's going to be, as it says, like in the Heidelberg, that we're going to be like Jesus's body, which can eat, but then also walk through walls. I'm not mad. Like, then also changes shape. Like if Mary Magdalene didn't know who Jesus, like she didn't recognize him, is he a shapeshifter also?
Oh.
So.
Yeah.
I think this was the first time that I like went into the Book of Confessions to actually look for an answer. So this was interesting. Like I've maybe read pieces of the Confessions, but using the back and trying to dictate through them.
Yeah. So I think that larger catechism, I think, kind of, in my mind at least, confirms that, the soul is the essence there. Our bodies were shaped from the clay, and then God breathed his breath. Is it, thinking of my Bible project, was it the Ruach or whatever that is?
Mm-hmm. The wind, the breath.
Yeah. And so that breathing us into that essence of our soul, I suppose.
Yeah.
But truth is, I don't give my soul a lot of thought. Maybe I should. I should give it more.
And I think that's why it's hard. I think it's an interesting.
Yeah.
But how much theological thought do we give to our bodies also?
Yeah.
So. And that,
I think I'm getting more caught up on the whole body being raised thing, because my whole I don't know, my opinion is ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So the body is so much more less important than soul, and that's not what's going to live on after our bodies die. The bodies are going to die and the soul is going to live on. So like, I think I was sort of surprised when I saw that we had this in our denomination's text. Obviously, I've read them before, but obviously did not remember that we're talking about the actual body. Like, I don't know, I just feel a little shocked.
That's a good and I think that is a big question that you hear a lot of opinions on, range of opinions. Do we believe in a bodily resurrection? And I could tell you something different every moment of the day. If it's raining, I'm going to tell you, of course I don't, because who would want this body? But if I'm kayaking, of course I do. Like, that makes sense. Yeah, I think this is the second Helvetic confession that we confirm that we're made of two different substances in one person. I just the wording of it.
Yeah,
because that one also says that our mortal bodies will be raised up.
And again, in that one, talking about two substances, I don't think, in my mind, that goes to matter and mass and material. And I don't think that the soul is having, and maybe that's not what they mean by substance, but it lends itself to Harry Potter and the Horcruxes. So
Aha, all right, wait. Before I switch the page.
Sorry.
Okay, what do we think about, it would have been a really great transition. I just got to drive this question home. What do we think about the psychology of souls in the PCUSA?
I think that we're saying that the soul is our essence that will continue on, and that on Judgment Day will be returned to apparently our earthly bodies, which, you know, hopefully we'll be able to have some control over. Improvements, shall we say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There's a wide, big Alice in Wonderland bunny hole we can jump down. But
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah. So, two substances that the soul is the essence that will continue on and is immortal.
Mhm.
All right. Horcruxes. Haha, here we are.
Yay.
So, there's going to be a huge piece of text, of course. What do you find interesting about this? I don't know, you guys are blocking. What lines or phrases? And then what made the soul theology in this text show? Well, Slughorn said, not looking at Riddle, but fiddling with the ribbon on top of his box of crystallized pineapple. Well, it can't hurt to give you an overview, of course, so that you understand the term. A horcrux is a word used for an object in which a person has concealed part of their soul. I don't quite understand how that works, though, sir, said Riddle. His voice was carefully controlled, but Harry could sense his excitement. Well, you split your soul, you see, said Slughorn, and hide part of it in an object outside the body. Then, even if one's body is attacked or destroyed, one cannot die, for part of the soul remains earthbound and undamaged. But of course, existence in such a form. Slughorn's face crumpled, and Harry found himself remembering the words he had heard nearly 2 years before. I was ripped from my body. I was less than spirit, less than the meanest ghost, but still I was alive. Few would want it, Tom, very few, and death would be preferable. But Riddle's hunger was now apparent. His expression was greedy, and he could no longer hide his longing. How do you split your soul? Well, said Slughorn uncomfortably, you must understand that the soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. But how do you do it? By an act of evil, a supreme act of evil, by committing murder. Killing rips the soul apart. The wizard, intent upon creating a Horcrux, could use the damage to his advantage. He would encase the torn portion, encase, but how? There is a spell. I don't know, said Slughorn. So, barring all the typos in that, what do we find interesting? What is...
It's for me, it's that idea of, again, going back to the was it the second Helvetic confession, where it's the soul's a substance. I guess I hadn't really thought of the soul as a substance, but don't we have some sayings or idioms or whatever about, you know, heart wrenching and tearing our soul and those kinds of things to represent anguish.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that he talks about the supreme act of evil being murder, that killing rips the soul apart.
Yeah, I'll say why.
I just think it's so true in real life, you know. It has to, I mean, I just imagine, I've never killed anyone, obviously, but I would imagine that it would severely damage your psyche to be in a position where you'd have to do such a thing.
Yeah, I agree, Michelle. I had forgotten that the way Voldemort split his soul into the Horcruxes was by murdering, until I reread it this time. And then it does make more sense, because it's exactly like you said. Of course it would split your soul to do something like that.
I go back and forth on it because I have watched too much Criminal Minds, basically. Like, is it like, and I hate that. Like, and I don't want to ask, but like, is murder the worst thing that you could do to somebody? But then also, like, thinking back to last week when we talked about how like thoughts destroy a person, and is there something, but murder is the end all be all, like the end of life is. So this is what has been rolling around my mind.
Mhm.
I think there are worse things you can do to a person. I just think that if you kill someone, I don't see how you could kill someone and not have it affect your soul.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This makes me think of the Dementors, and they talk about the Dementor's kiss being worse than death. I'm just kind of in the outlines of, worse than murder or whatever, but
Yeah.
I don't mean to take us down a rabbit hole, but okay, so the Dementors suck out your soul. What happens there?
Yeah. Yeah, we have seen the soul theology and things like that. And I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, what do they do with it after they suck it out?
Right?
I think they eat it. Don't they eat it?
They must. It can't go anywhere else, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but it doesn't like put skin back on there. Well, if they were ever skin, I just like, it's interesting.
It's a really
When
good
I was oh, go ahead. All I was going to say is that my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a prisoner of war in World War II, and my dad was in the military, and I have a military background, and I think when I was reading, and maybe it's just because I've been reading parts of my mom is writing a book, and it's a lot about her dad and his trauma from war, and I've been helping to do a few things on it, so it's been on my mind. But when I read this part about killing, splintering your soul, it made me feel empathy for military veterans in terms of and you sort of alluded to it, Anna, when you said someone who's made to do this. So it might not necessarily be a total choice, but someone who experiences that for whatever reason still is going to have splinters in their soul, I think.
Yeah, and I think I took a philosophy course like way early in my college career, and I cannot remember exactly what the quote was, but it was about like a man cannot cut down a tree without every whack at a tree also hurting his soul. That like the damage that we do to even inanimate objects hurts our soul, or like damages our soul in a way. So I think that of course there's people that psychologically kill because psychologically they're damaged, but I think that more oftentimes than not, like as we see here, like Tom Riddle is killing because he's killing, but I think a lot of the time murder comes down to your life or my life. Is it survival? And yeah, I think that's how it just the absolute worst. And my best friend who has severe PTSD, he has so much pain and suffering, but he won't ever share with me because he doesn't want to give me that baggage. And I think that's what vets have too. It's interesting. But then I wonder, can we split our souls without murder?
Hey, what happened? Oh, yay. Hey,
Well, I think according to, it would have to be a pretty intense act to split your soul, but I think of rape would be one.
Yeah.
To me, that would be such an act of violence and horror that it would be soul splitting.
Yeah.
Yep. Lane, any thoughts about this? As you're just coming back in.
I do appreciate that J.K. Rowling gives herself a shout out for foreshadowing within the text. I think that's pretty clever of her.
That Harry found himself remembering. Yeah.
Like, Harry remembered that this was mentioned in a book a few years ago. I think is
in his life.
I mean, it's important because as a reader, it's good to be like, oh, okay, there is like a tying point, and if you remember that, you would remember it. But when I heard Anna reading it out loud, I thought, J.K. Rowling's trying to remind us of something. So, and I missed a lot of what you guys talked about, so that's about all I have. You turned into a dog.
And I do wonder about the Slughorn, as he says, you must understand that the soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. And I wonder if that is, regardless of our soul theology and where we fall, and we'll talk about kind of the spectrum as we've talked about it, but is that something that like we can agree with across all categories, that the goal is to have a whole soul?
I would say yes, the goal would be to have a whole soul.
Trying to find another part that I thought I could put in here, but I didn't, and I should have. Well, maybe.
I haven't read this book in a while, so those of you who have read it more recently might be able to help me. Did Dumbledore say that he brought Slughorn back with intention on Harry having access to his like memories? That's right, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Just such another interesting parallel between Harry and Tom, where we actually see Harry doing a lot of similar things as Tom, trying to charm him into giving up secrets, but they're for a different reason. And I think it almost goes back, well, it does go back to that intent thing that we talked about in the first or second week, where we see Harry and Tom walking very similar paths in a lot of ways, including the means of which they go to get their information. But Harry's intent is to use it to right or wrong, whereas Tom's is to do something different. So, yeah, I don't know if I don't have any questions about that. I just think it's kind of a peculiar and cool.
Yeah.
A little bit later in this chapter, we do hear on page 511, but I'll read it for you. So they're talking about it. Dumbledore says, you have to understand this. By attempting to kill you, Voldemort singled you out as the remarkable person. And then Dumbledore says to Harry, you are protected and sure by your ability to love, said Dumbledore loudly. The only protection that can possibly work against the lure of power like Voldemort's. In spite of all the temptation you have endured, all the suffering, you remain pure of heart. Just as pure as you were at the age of 11 when you stared into a mirror that reflected your heart's desire and showed you only the way to thwart Lord Voldemort, not immortality or riches. Harry, have you any idea how few wizards could have seen what you saw in that mirror? Voldemort should have known then what he was dealing with, but he did not. But he knows it now. You have flitted into Lord Voldemort's mind without damage to yourself, but he cannot possess you without enduring moral agony, as he discovered in the Ministry. I do not think he understands Harry, but then he was in such a hurry to manipulate his own soul that he never paused to understand the incomparable power of a soul that is untarnished and whole. So, and that is all book 5. That's the synopsis on the psychological play that was going on between Harry and Voldemort. But that's an interesting point that Voldemort says, that that Voldemort, that Slughorn alludes to, that the goal is to remain, like, is for your soul to remain intact, but also it's a huge attribute. It's a huge benefit. It's a protection against evil. So.
Well, we kind of see in that regard two different ways for an approach to living. Is you separate your soul into as many places and hide it deep down in different things so that nothing can touch it, and you can live forever as the shell of a person, or you fill your soul with love, which is in J.K. Rowling's world more powerful than the curse of death. And you may only live your one life, but it's a life that's protected by that power. That what they call it, old time magic, or that ancient magic of love that they didn't explain at all. They just said that it was like the most ancient of magic. So
yeah, we all went, yeah, exactly. We know that. There didn't need to be an explanation.
So I think that's kind of an interesting duality between the two as well.
Is that why it's anti? What? That's why the anti. What am I thinking? The anti Dementor curse, not curse, but
the Patronus.
The Patronus is based on happy memories that are based in love. Maybe.
I would think
Mhm.
definitely could be. And then that's the Bogart. Never mind, that's different.
I was just going to say, to a lesser degree, the Bogart is, you're turning something bad into something funny
That's
Yeah.
true, yeah.
for that ridiculous curse. So,
So, talking through this kind of the existence of Horcrux and the existence of Dementors, what do you think kind of the Harry Potter universe's theology is on soul?
The soul is filled with love, perhaps, and that heinous acts shatter your soul into tiny pieces that can be hidden away.
Yeah.
I feel like the Harry Potter universe has a better grasp on a singular soul theology than Christianity does. So,
yeah.
I think that might be too far. You would have got burned for that a couple of hundreds of years ago, because I just don't think that I don't think we've explored it enough. I think that it's there.
Yeah.
Maybe.
well, I said singular.
Okay.
I think everybody talks about it, but everybody has a different idea of it. And this book is essentially about Harry's soul versus Voldemort's soul. And what we ultimately find out is that's essentially what it is. Because even though Harry carries a part, Harry carries a part. Carries a part of Voldemort in him. His soul is still pure, and I think based on what we've read, that there's more of a focus on soul than what we experience, generally speaking, and in church, because it's hard for us to agree on what, is the soul a substance? Is it a this? Is it that? Is it part of our body? When we're resurrected, does it matter what our bodies are? Kind of what you guys were talking about earlier. Does a New Jerusalem really come down from the sky, or is it just a metaphor? Like, how does all of this work with our soul being two substances, or our personhood being two substances and such? So,
Well, and I think that there's a whole, if we take kind of the line of the different objects that represent soul in the Harry Potter universe, of course we have Horcruxes and we have Dementors, but we also have like the whole book, The Chamber of Secrets, that Horcruxes, like these tiny pieces of soul, actually don't stop being soul and don't actually stop manipulating if that is their own thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think also one of the things that's different between, or maybe it's part of the Harry Potter soul theology, is that love protects the soul, that the soul should stay whole, and that love protects the soul.
Yeah.
and that doesn't always, to Lane's point, that's not often a central tenet in Christian thinking, as much as we might like to think it is.
Yeah.
You know, love everybody. God
Yeah.
says love everybody. But
Mm.
this is just making it very blatantly clear that what is protecting Harry's soul is his mother's love.
Amen. What a walk-off for you.
Aha!
I know, I gotta go. Bye, you
Oh,
guys.
Alex, congratulations.
Hi, Laura.
Yeah.
Tell everybody hi.
Yay for Alex.
Yeah.
So here we go into our compare and contrast.
Sorry, can I add one thing? Just piggybacking off of that. Every part of Voldemort's soul that's been separate seems like it's trying to get back to him, right? So like Harry feels in his scar because he is a Horcrux when Voldemort's near. And because, like you mentioned, all of the parts of it are still acting on behalf of the whole in a sense, and they're fighting to live and survive. And they, so that kind of goes to that idea. I think that we, even in this universe, there's a longing for wholeness of the soul.
In real life.
Well, and in Harry's universe, because what Voldemort's soul is doing, even though it's been shattered into 7 pieces, it's still trying to get back together. Because Voldemort is living in the 6th book, is living without a full soul, because parts of his soul are still in Horcruxes.
Well, and he hasn't necessarily been living that way since probably Ginny, right? Like when Ginny saw him when he was at Hogwarts. Ginny in book 2, she saw a representation of, I think it's probably the first Horcrux, that diary was his first Horcrux.
Oh, right,
because
yeah,
we see him as a student.
So you mean since he was a student?
So since he was a student, he hasn't had his whole soul.
I see. Yeah. So I think that's just I'm curious about that, but that idea that we're constant, like and this is just kind of a general, our universe thing, but while our bodies and our universe is constantly in entropy, constantly pulling itself apart, there's this gravity that's trying to pull us together. And as we as Christians believe that's God, there's like a weight that keeps us anchored. And this idea that even Voldemort's soul, the most tarnished of all of the pieces are still aware of each other and trying to be together. Maybe.
I like it.
There's no reference in the book, is there, anywhere about, mending souls or anything like that, is there?
Oh, yes, but I don't know whether it's in this book.
Okay. Because I think that's an interesting point, though. It's, the souls wanting to get back together. Has anybody ever tried to rebound or reattach or mend?
Because at some point, I have no idea where it is. Harry asks, basically, the way to put back a soul is through true remorse. But the quote is like, it will kill you.
Yeah.
Like, your remorse will kill you.
So let's see. Okay.
Lane Google.
Well, we'll see how reliable.
Yeah.
It says that split souls can be repaired, and it doesn't give us a citation, but as long as its owner has not yet died. The catch is that the process itself can be lethal and requires the owner to feel sincere remorse, not something that someone who is vile enough to create a Horcrux could ever feel.
Yeah.
So
is that a kind of a parallel for us then in the Christian world? Well, in the world, that we can't repent enough. We can't be remorseful enough. Jesus had to be remorseful for us.
Which then might take us full circle back to Laura's comment that love is what protects our soul. And if we just look at love and we capitalize it and pretend like it's in the Bible, we can read it as Jesus. I'm saying that Jesus, if you replace love with Jesus like people do in the Bible, you could find yourself saying that there is an element of this like everlasting love that protects the soul, because God knows that, from all of the things that we've read in the Bible, that we cannot help but fracture our souls without that. So,
well, and that's what was it? The last one says like our souls are destined to fall or something. So if we were to put all these together, we're just gonna kind of dialogue them. If we put the Shema, like if we put the Bible pullouts that we had, the Book of Confessions, and the Harry Potter stuff. How are they similar? How are they different? And this is probably a false dynamic, but that's how I thought about it. Which one is like the most robust? Like which one feels the most full? Which one feels the most shallow or like thin? And then which one is the most plausible? Like which one can you buy into as a person? Or do they play all together? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, they're all similar because they all talk about the soul. I'm sorry, I'm going very shallow here.
Ah,
No, start at the beginning. Yeah, start at the beginning.
Different. The difference would be in the wording of the first commandment and the Shema. Did I say it right, Anna?
it's Shema, but yeah.
Okay, sorry. It's a new thing for me.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Great.
It's also different because in the Book of Confessions, in the Book of Confessions, there's just the body and the soul. Jump in anytime, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I think you're doing great. Yeah.
I do wonder if and I don't know whether like where Lane got that citation from Google, and I would be interested to find it somewhere, but it makes me think that like how the Book of Confessions says that like you have an immortal soul. If Harry Potter, the difference is that like you can only put your soul back together if you're still alive. So then does your soul die?
Yeah.
You die. Your physical body dies.
Well, now
Yeah.
Well, it's a question, but then
that's like another 8-hour class.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These last two books could just be like series onto themselves.
Because then the question is, can you be redeemed even after you've died?
Yeah.
Where?
Does Jesus' salvation from his death on the cross extend past our death?
I was talking about Harry Potter.
I know,
Yeah.
but I'm saying that what you're saying, well,
Well,
anyway.
I'm saying that there's immortal soulness
Right.
from the Book of Confession
Yes.
that can be redeemed by Jesus.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And then, but I guess I was comparing it to the idea that the only way to mend your soul is to happen if it happens before death. So what my question was, in the Harry Potter universe and then in our universe, because it's a debate that exists, once you die, does that mean you have no more chances to be redeemed?
Yeah.
You know
It depends whether you're elect.
well, but then you don't have to have been chosen. But we can finally, okay, now
I'm really proud.
all right,
of
so
that
now it's
Now we can talk about predestination.
now like it's 6
Wait,
p.m.
no,
Here we
there's
go.
so many other things. There's so many other things that we need to
Wait,
get
hold-
to.
I do want to say one thing. Do you think what other, so as I was getting Oliver Moore bottle, Horcruxes and port keys both are like similar to me now in my head because they're like this thing given to this most random thing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
asked about that, and Dumbledore says no, they're not super random because you don't want people to like throw them out.
Well,
So just like the Horcruxes are made from significant things to Tom Riddle, but not to you.
right, but I still think it's interesting that we
That
have
you imbue
we
them
have
with
two
something
different
else.
things that we have two different pretty powerful spells that are basically like giving power to the inanimate objects that are meant to on the surface to somebody passing by, not to you.
Yeah.
To look like nothing. That means nothing to this. I just was thinking about it.
No,
so.
I mean that's
And
what we want
Yeah.
to talk about.
And if there's other things that happen in these books that have that component as well, and what you think that means.
But a port key doesn't rip your soul apart.
No,
And
yeah,
leave
no.
part of you behind.
Right. Although it can,
No.
whatever that
That's
word
not
is.
Split you. Like flitch or
Flitch.
flinch.
I thought it could.
Flinch, flitch,
Is that only an operation?
flinch.
But
I don't know.
And only Madame Pomfrey can fix you if that happens.
Or Hermione, right?
Well, Hermione did it with the
Oh,
Disney
Hermione did it. That's right.
With Essence of did
But spoilers.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting we'll kind of turn to broader topics, but as a concept of soul, I think there's a lot of dialogue that could be had,
Mm-hmm.
and how it all plays together and how it all plays differently.
Yeah. So, and maybe we talk about this next week, but, my mind does go to the whole, Dumbledore's soul and him always kind of coming back throughout the book in various ways.
Yeah.
And of course, Harry in the train station, but we'll get there. And, what are the implications for soul in that?
Yeah, that chapter is just going to be a whole hour and a half class.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah, is Dumbledore's soul inside of Fawkes, the Phoenix?
But why do we see more than we see Dumbledore? We see Harry's parents a lot more often, almost
Yeah.
in every book, and that's not true strictly. But we see them in the Mirror of Erised in the first book. We
Mhm.
see them as a ghost in the Goblet of Fire. They come out of Dumbledore's
Yep.
wand. We see them in the 7th book.
So, because I was thinking about
We see
that,
them
like,
in the memories.
what's
of
the
Secret.
what's is there an opposite Horcrux? Because we see like these ideas of like, oh, how did Fawkes know to bring the sorting hat down that had the sword in it, which is like a random sentence, and like how did and then after Dumbledore dies, Fawkes flies away. Like there's all
Gosh,
of these.
it's so good.
There's so many different things that, and then we're talking about memories of the family and stuff too. So is that idea then
Mhm.
of that love is kind of like the other
Mhm.
side of the Horcrux coin, where there's kind of the same
Yeah.
opportunity to have your soul put into the world, I guess maybe in a sense, differently, obviously, because it's still your soul is so whole that it goes into other things. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll let you
Well,
link
and it's just
as
that
I
idea.
go ahead. Go, Jeremy.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to move us
I was
on.
just gonna say,
You
I think
tie us up.
yeah, Harry and Harry's parents always showing up throughout the books in memories and things like that. In a sense, through love, you're putting yourself into other people in a weird sort of way.
Yeah.
You're
I
making
don't know.
people into Horcruxes?
Yeah,
But with,
but in a nice and good way.
In a
yeah.
nice and healthy way.
So a better name.
Healthy cruxes.
Yeah.
Hallelujah Horcruxes. So then this is just kind of free-flowing conversation. Here are
Mhm.
general observations that I'm going to throw out, and we don't have to talk about them, or we can talk about them. Is magic ethical?
Yeah.
For example, love potions, unbreakable vows, and memory manipulations. What makes a
Yeah.
story a story? What makes a memory a memory? Like, for example, Dumbledore fills in kind of the blanks between the memories. So what makes, what's the difference between a story and a memory? And then we have, of course, the different journeys or different things that Harry does with Dumbledore and their relationship. A trusted textbook, the half book, the book that Harry uses throughout. We see Draco's storyline. Was it Dumbledore's death or Dumbledore's murder? And then at the end, we hear Rufus S. And his offer towards Harry, like working with the ministry. So who wants to pick one out, or we can just go kind of random, or we can keep talking about souls and love.
So I will say this, that the magical ethic is magic ethical. I don't, of course, I think in my mind it's always, intent and all that.
Yeah.
But I have a big problem with the magic community living separate from the Muggle community.
All right.
And I get that there's maybe been persecutions and things like that in the past, but you would think that if you'd have those communities intermingled there, you get the best of both worlds together, how many problems you could solve, and how many things like the memory manipulations of Muggles who see flying cars, that you avoid.
Yeah.
And has the FDA approved, memory manipulations and done long-term studies on Alzheimer's or something? So.
Well, and this,
Yeah.
what is it? This is like one of the funniest parts in the whole in the whole series for me. At the on page 6, the Minister of Magic only reveals himself or herself to the Muggle Prime Minister of the day. We find it best to maintain secrecy. Then why, pleaded the Prime Minister, hasn't a former Prime Minister warned me? At this, Fudge actually laughed. My dear Prime Minister, are you going to tell anybody?
Yeah.
I love it.
There you go.
That actually, have either of you seen Black Panther?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
Well,
a Wakanda problem.
yeah. So Michelle, in the movie and in the comics, Wakanda is this like thriving African nation that hides under the illusion that it is a third world country, and they have technology that's very advanced, and they're the essential question, that kind of the big drama is that some of the drama is that all of the kings for so long had chosen to keep it all to themselves instead of sharing it. And the movie kind of has this these archetypes of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, in terms of like, do we share this gift that we have to the world, and how do we do that? And I think it kind of is similar in some ways to the Muggle and magical community, just in that you're putting a lot of there's a very powerful group of people who have been oppressed and have been misunderstood for a very long time, saying, you know what, we're not even going to mess with you guys anymore. And then at a certain point, the other guys, or us, because we're the omniscient reader and we know everything, start saying, well, shoot, you guys kind of stink for not helping people out. And it's just kind of interesting, because I agree with you, Jeremy, and I also wonder if you were talking to a wizard, would roll with me.
Yeah.
Are they going to say, well, you don't know what my great great grandfather went through when he and his wife were tortured because they saved a cat by so I agree. I think
that reminds me of this. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just kind of rambling at that point.
But totally, as the omniscient reader, would I read a book that didn't have this like totally hidden world? And
I
don't think I could. But I think it's a good ethical. I like the secrecy of it sometimes, and the high, this world that within the world, as we talked about.
But there is in some of the examples that you give here, there's some interesting questions that go to intent and consent. And how, because a love potion is only different from a roofie or another drug in its name, essentially. So,
because Ron had one, and
pretty messed up.
I mean, Tom Riddle's dad for a thing with jerk is he?
Yeah. And so, I don't remember what I was calling.
Yeah, there's a line. And it is that consent and I'm curious. Yeah, consent and intent.
Intent is what I said. Yeah.
So I think that the question too, is magic ethical? Based on our discussion, it depends on the intent and the use of magic by the wizard.
Makes sense.
Yeah, which is just like us Muggles. Everything is
cars and guns and all the other things.
One question answered.
Yes.
Check.
Everything in moderation. That's all.
Yeah.
Gosh, I keep having a thought and then it keeps leaving.
Story, a story, a memory, a memory. What's the difference between a story and a memory?
That's a great question.
Or are they the same thing?
Well, does a story tell you both sides, whereas a memory is biased?
Maybe. I think stories can be biased too. So and memories could not. I don't know.
Well, there's because like when Slughorn remembers the riddle scene, it gets really hazy because he's changing his own memory to to do, and we've all done that. That's like built into the biology of childbirth, right?
Well, there are. I mean, if you meet my parents, this is a really interesting question because My dad has like he can remember like on January 15th in 1964 what the temperature was and what exactly he was wearing. Like he has this
Oh
crazy
gosh.
memory. And my mom tells stories, and Lane has been there with them.
Yes.
And it's
This
very
is being
funny, and they're
recorded.
going to listen to it someday, so it's going to be very fun. But there's actually psychological research that's done on memories, and the more that we often tell a memory, the less accurate it becomes. So memories are not just like one shape, they actually stretch and they change the more that you tell stories, or the more that you remember stories, or like the more that you remember something or an event, it changes. And so I'm wondering, at what point does a memory stretch to a point that it becomes a story, and does it really matter? It's just,
Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting in a book like this where we're trying to uncover, we're like super sleuthing the past with the basic knowledge that the narrator may not be reliable. Like we're going into the memories knowing the parts of them we have to do more work to get the actual memory for. And so storytelling wise, it's very interesting, I think, because there's more going on than just Harry asking somebody a question and us trusting them to answer it. But we're saying you have to go into Slughorn's head and then figure out that the memory is not right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that didn't answer your question.
Yeah. So in this case, memories are truth or proof or evidence versus
Right.
story, which could be anything. Yeah. Interesting.
So then we have this this kind of background or main tenet maybe of this book 6 is the various journeys that Harry has with Dumbledore. Whether they are like to somewhere specific, like actually to Slughorn's home in the cave, or we go back in memories and stories.
Yeah. I think that's the piece that I enjoyed the most about this book. Was just kind of those journeys.
Why, Jeremy? Why do you think?
I don't know. Well, I mentioned it earlier. You know, the Order of the Phoenix was just so much about Dumbledore trying to put distance from himself between himself and Harry, so that Voldemort can't, exploit that link. And then all of a sudden, I think, and maybe it's the fact that Harry and Dumbledore are together now, and their relationship is growing, and Harry maybe has a father figure or something like that along those lines.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Especially in the wake of Sirius dying, you see this.
Yeah.
Someone stepping up in that similar way. Makes sense. I like, as much as it's maybe one of the darker parts of the series, I really love the memory of the House of Gaunt. Like, it's so dark but it's so interesting to me. Like psychologically, it's so fascinating. Just the pride that we can hold on to so much that it steals everything else.
Yeah.
And like our history or whatever hill you want to die on, it can drive you to insanity and abuse, and it's just and then we get back to love potions, like Tom Riddle.
Yeah.
His parents.
Well, it takes that notion of the theme of purebloods throughout, and the critique of purebloods is, well, you have a lot of pureblood families, but they're not great families. Or in the case of Sirius Black was the last of a pureblood family that's gone. The Gaunts are kind of the extreme of you're purebloods, but
The dangers of inbreeding.
yeah.
I mean, there has to be something. It's like, what did we see? Oh, there was something online that was like the European history, like the European monarchies, and there's a picture of one of the King Georges with the Tsar of Russia, and they look exactly the same. And you're like, because you've been inbreeding for years, like that's hemophilia.
Yeah.
But because like in book 7, we see that potentially the Gaunts and the Potters and the Dumbledores are like the three most ancient magical families.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
So it's an interesting, maybe not the Dumbledores, but
Yeah.
at least the Potters and the Gaunts and
Yeah.
or the Riddles. So yeah, and then we get back to that story that we've compared and contrast, Tom Riddle and the orphanage, and then we have Hezebah Smith's house. Poor powdered old woman.
Is that where that's the piece where he gets the cup of Helga Hufflepuff's cup, right?
Yeah.
Is that the scene? Okay.
Doesn't he? Oh wait, no, that's book 7. Never mind.
Hmm?
I was thinking of the one. Doesn't he? Where the snake comes out of her?
The set 7.
That's book 7, right? Yeah. Good times.
And then of course we talked about his memory, and then they go to the cave, which was like when we heard about it from the orphanage, I was not thinking it was like a cave. Like
Right.
Yeah.
That was a spooky place.
yeah.
The movie, I think that was one of my favorite parts of that movie was how they brought that to life because it was like very terrifying.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They did an awesome job.
They
did.
really did a good job.
I really
Well-
stopped caring about the movies in the middle, and then I think this is the one that brought me back to watch them again because I was and then
I think 6, 7, and 8 really did.
yeah. Although I think my favorite one was actually the first half of 7, but anyway,
Yeah.
the cave.
Yeah.
So the cave makes me think of the Inferi, and
Yeah.
and where do the Inferi fit in this conversation about soul? Is
Yes.
there a body without
Yep.
soul? I assume.
Right.
Mentors, victims.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh,
I have no idea.
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. That they just kind of get named, and then we don't learn a ton about them.
They don't talk about.
Old
They don't
lake.
talk about how they're formed. Or,
Yeah.
what's that?
And there's a whole lake filled of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part of the now that I'm remembering more of the movie, that was freaking scary.
Yeah, it was.
And then we go to the textbook, the Half-Blood Prince's Recipes and Spells, which is an interesting underlying thing that, of course, I think I think Hermione compares it to book 2 a lot with Tom Riddle's
Right. She's
diary.
yeah. Michelle, when Anna was reading through this, I saw you kind of smirk at this one, and I'm not sure if it was the same for the same reason as me, but in our Sunday night classes, we've had a lot of conversations about all of what we thought were trusted textbooks, telling us history, being a little bit more story and less memory, if we're using that analogy. So I'm not sure if that's what it was, but having a textbook with notes in the margins, I think is interesting. And it also made me think of my student who had a very bad day once, then wrote the F word a bunch of times in his textbook, and his teacher is going to find out when she gets it from him sometime next year. So
Oops.
less useful than the Half-Blood Prince, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I the tricks that are in there that the other wizards are supposed to figure out on their own, but
Right. But it's so helpful if you just wrote it down.
right? Wrote it that way.
And then you hear that it's Snape's all along. And does that change his character? And does that validate him or invalidate him?
Yeah.
I still don't like Snape.
That's also one of my favorite storylines in all this. Because you have that whole mystery of who's the Half-Blood Prince.
Yeah.
But then it's also, kind of a study in power in a way. That book is a source of power for Harry in many
Yes.
ways. And
Yeah.
A power he's
And,
never had to be good at potions.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
the proof that Snape would have made an excellent potions teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, Lane's not going to be here next week when I
Well,
pull off my Snape theory. It's going to blow minds.
I've been hyping up next week for a long time, but I just found out on Monday that because it's Memorial Day, they're moving my Monday class at the university to Wednesday.
Oh,
I get to mute my video during that class, so I'll probably
Be here.
jump in because I have some thoughts.
Gosh. And then
Very cool.
our last thought, Draco Malfoy and his storyline and his arc, or not arc, through this book, which is kind of
Mm.
something.
Oh yeah. I couldn't think of what it was.
Is it revealed right at the end that he?
Well, we see that he, his mother makes the unbreakable vow at the beginning with
Snape.
Snape. Yep.
Yeah.
And then we see that he's like super sketchy all the way through. And then at the end, he's the one that corners Dumbledore and says, and Dumbledore urges him not to kill because his soul is whole. And then we see that Draco doesn't actually do it, but Snape does it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, and that's with in the room with the box and the apples and then the birds. you got that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is that you're on
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm
Yeah.
there. Okay.
That was cool.
And that is,
Go ahead,
I
Beth.
just think for Snape, that is, I appreciate so much what he does right there to
Mhm.
save Draco.
Yeah.
I still have a little bit of resentment towards him for the way that he's treated Harry throughout the entire books. Like, he has not been friendly.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
to save the soul of a child is a pretty remarkable
Yes.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. That's true. That's true.
Well, and that gets into your next question. Was Dumbledore's death or was it his murder? So if it was murder, did Snape tear his soul?
We'll have to wait till
He
book
did it, I
7
don't
to
think
find
so,
out.
but he did it.
but I think he and Dumbledore had talked about it. Like, and I
Yeah.
don't know where I get this, but I really feel like they had a plan
Yeah.
and knew what Malfoy had planned, and so they had a whole counter plan and
It was premeditated.
lots of premeditation.
Well, that goes back to consent. Premeditated consent. That's what we find out in book 7.
I just when you set it up like that, it sounds like
A rendezvous.
no, it sounds like euthanasia or something.
I would
mean,
call this euthanasia.
I guess it is
Yeah.
kind of because Dumbledore. Yeah, that's true. Hi, thank you. More.
So, we will leave it at that profound point to chew on for the next week. But thank you all. Any last points we want to make, or any last thoughts as we take away?
I have a question based on Oliver. Just wait a minute. Based loosely on our conversation about magic being ethical, I was thinking about how in the Bible we read about Jesus. We read about all these miracles that he performs. And then we talk about that we live in a world where there's no miracles, but there are miracles where people whose lives are saved every day by medicine and by surgery and by all sorts of things. And I wonder, in some ways, and maybe I'm just still dreaming that someday I'll become a wizard, but magic and the way that it's explained in Marvel movies oftentimes, or at least for a long time, was that it's just science that we don't understand yet.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I guess I have no question here. It's just the idea that some of these things
We will evolve.
yeah, is this
Mutants,
I don't know.
X-Men.
I guess I don't really have a question. It was kind of like when I think about miracles today, or when I think about Jesus performing literal miracles where he's like mending people's tendons together on hands that are not able to move, like what's to say that when a doctor is able to do that now, it's not also miraculous and incredible? And then so in the same way, if a wizard is able to save someone, even though they're using something that we might question its ethicalness, are we still seeing miracles? That it didn't go anywhere that I wanted it to. Sorry. I was just
It's a point.
thinking about how similar those things might feel, but now they feel not as similar.
Any last points, Jeremy or Michelle?
Please, something better than that.
No. I thought that same thing though. You know, magic is science. We just haven't figured it out yet. Yeah.
Mm,
I like it.
it's an interesting thing. All right. Well, thank you
A
guys
lot of fun.
for a wonderful class that I'm excited for next
Yeah.
week. And I won't say that, but yep, we will do next week and then we'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Resurrection.
It's always fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
I enjoyed
Thank you
Yeah,
guys.
so
Yeah.
good night.
Good. Thank you
Thank
guys.
you. Good night.
How do I get out?
Bye guys.
Bye.
Bye.